In 1730, a single coffee plant was smuggled out of Paris in a desperate act of botanical espionage. That theft would condemn millions of people to slavery and create the modern world as you know it. The coffee in your hand right now. It exists because of one of history's most brutal economic systems. And the really disturbing part? Most of what you've been told about coffee's origins is a carefully crafted lie. Here's what they don't teach you in coffee shops. Every major coffee-producing region on Earth became one through forced labor, colonial violence, or outright slavery. Brazil, Colombia, Vietnam, Indonesia. Each has a dark secret buried beneath those aromatic beans. But here's the twist. The coffee plant itself didn't even want to leave Africa. Humans had to steal it, smuggle it, and transplant it across 3 continents through deception and violence. Why would people go to such extreme lengths for a bitter drink? The answer involves Dutch spies, French botanical gardens, a lovesick naval officer, and the deaths of over 12 million enslaved people. Today, you'll discover how a simple Ethiopian berry became the world's second most traded commodity, worth over $200 billion annually, and why the industry still doesn't want you knowing the full story. Let's rewind to the 15th century. Coffee wasn't always the global obsession it is today. For hundreds of years, it was Africa's best-kept secret. The coffee plant, Coffea arabica, grew wild in the Ethiopian highlands. Local tribes would crush the cherries, mix them with animal fat, and create energy balls for long journeys. But they didn't brew it. The Oromo people of Ethiopia called these snacks buna kela. They treated coffee as food, not a beverage. The idea of roasting beans and brewing them into a drink? That innovation came from across the Red Sea, in Yemen. By the 1400s, Sufi monks in Yemen discovered something remarkable. When they roasted and brewed coffee, it helped them stay awake during nighttime prayers. They called it kahwa, meaning that which prevents sleep. Word spread fast. Within 50 years, coffee houses dotted every major city in the Ottoman Empire. Istanbul alone had over 600 coffee houses by 1550. People gathered to discuss politics, play chess, and share news. The Ottoman government hated this. Coffee houses became centers of rebellion. In 1511, the governor of Mecca tried to ban coffee entirely. He claimed it was as intoxicating as wine and violated Islamic law. The ban lasted exactly 11 days before the Sultan of Cairo overruled him. Why? Because the Sultan himself was addicted to coffee. But here's where the story gets darker. The Yemeni port of Mocha controlled the entire global coffee trade, and they were obsessed with maintaining their monopoly. Every coffee bean exported from Yemen was boiled or parboiled first, making it impossible to germinate. You couldn't grow your own coffee plant even if you bought 1,000 pounds of beans. The penalty for smuggling a living coffee plant? Execution. This is where European powers enter the story, and everything changes. The Dutch East India Company, history's first mega-corporation, wanted coffee desperately. Their ships dominated the spice trade, but coffee was different. Coffee meant power. It meant control over a rapidly growing European market. In 1616, Dutch merchants finally succeeded. A trader named Peter van den Broeke bribed officials in Mocha and smuggled living coffee seedlings onto a ship bound for Amsterdam. But the plants died during the voyage. They tried again in 1658. Same result. The delicate coffee plants couldn't survive the journey around Africa. It took 50 years of attempts before they finally succeeded in 1696. The Dutch transported coffee plants to their colonial holdings in Java, Indonesia. And this is where the real darkness begins, because those plantations weren't built with paid workers. They were built with enslaved people. The Dutch cultivation system forced Indonesian villagers to dedicate 1/5 of their land to cash crops, including coffee. Village leaders who refused. Their villages were burned. The system resulted in massive famines that killed hundreds of thousands, but the coffee flowed. By 1711, Java was exporting thousands of pounds of coffee to Europe annually. The Dutch monopoly seemed unbreakable, They guarded their plantations like military installations. No foreigners allowed. No plant exports permitted. Then came the French, with an even more ambitious plan. In 1714, the mayor of Amsterdam made a costly diplomatic mistake. He gifted a small coffee tree to King Louis XIV of France. Just one tree. The mayor probably thought it was a harmless gesture, an exotic plant for the royal greenhouse. He had no idea what he'd just unleashed. That single tree arrived at the Jardin des Plantes in Paris and changed world history. French botanists became obsessed with cultivating it. They created perfect greenhouse conditions, studied its flowering patterns, and successfully produced seeds. Within a decade, they had dozens of healthy coffee plants. But France had a problem. They had no tropical colonies suitable for coffee cultivation. Well, that's not entirely true. France controlled Haiti, then called Saint-Domingue, a Caribbean island with perfect growing conditions. But transporting delicate coffee seedlings across the Atlantic seemed impossible. Remember, this was the 1720s. Ocean voyages took 2 months minimum. Every attempt to ship coffee plants to the Caribbean failed, until Gabriel de Clieu volunteered for what seemed like a suicide mission. De Clieu was a French naval officer stationed in Martinique. During a visit to Paris in 1720, he became convinced he could successfully transport a coffee plant across the Atlantic. His superiors thought he was insane. The head botanist at Jardin des Plantes refused to give him a plant. He smuggled a single coffee seedling out of the royal greenhouse and boarded a ship to Martinique in 1723. What happened next sounds like fiction, but it's documented in de Clieu's own journals. The voyage was a nightmare. Pirates attacked the ship near the Azores. The crew repelled them, but the encounter damaged their water supplies. As drinking water ran low, de Clieu faced an impossible choice: save himself or save the plant. He chose the plant. For weeks, de Clieu shared half his water ration with the coffee seedling. His fellow passengers thought he'd gone mad. One jealous passenger even tried to destroy the plant during the night. De Clieu caught him and built a protective barrier around it. After 2 months at sea, they reached Martinique. De Clieu planted his coffee tree and guarded it personally for 18 months. He built a thorn fence around it. He watered it himself every morning. When it finally produced cherries, he harvested the seeds and created dozens of new plants. By 1726, Martinique had its first coffee plantation. But here's what the romantic story leaves out. Those plantations were built by enslaved Africans. Within 20 years, Martinique was exporting millions of pounds of coffee annually. The French weren't satisfied with just Martinique. They spread coffee cultivation to Guadeloupe, Haiti, and French Guiana. Each new plantation required more enslaved labor. The French imported over 30,000 enslaved Africans to Haiti, specifically for coffee production. And remember, all of this came from one stolen plant. But the real story gets stranger. The Portuguese were watching the French success with envy. Brazil, Portugal's massive South American colony, had the perfect climate for coffee. There was just one problem. Neither the Dutch nor the French would share their coffee plants. In 1727, Portugal sent Lieutenant Colonel Francisco de Melo Paleta to French Guiana on a diplomatic mission. His real job? Smuggle out coffee plants by any means necessary. Paleta tried bribing plantation managers. No success. He attempted to sneak into nurseries at night. Guards caught him. He was about to fail completely when he made an unexpected ally, the governor's wife. Her name was never recorded in official documents, but according to legend, she became infatuated with the charming Portuguese officer. At his farewell banquet, she presented him with a bouquet of flowers. Hidden inside? Coffee? Cuttings. Paleta returned to Brazil with enough plant material to start an entire industry. By 1730, Brazil had its first coffee plantations. By 1800, Brazil was the world's largest coffee producer, a position it still holds today. That conquest came at an unfathomable cost. Brazil's coffee boom was built on the bodies of enslaved Africans. Between 1700 and 1888, Brazil imported over 4 million enslaved people. That's more than any other country in history, and coffee was the primary driver of this trade. The conditions on coffee plantations were unspeakable. Enslaved workers woke before dawn and worked until sunset, sometimes 16 hours daily. During harvest season, they worked by torchlight into the night. The work was backbreaking. Each coffee cherry had to be hand-picked at peak ripeness. The mortality rate was staggering. Most enslaved people on coffee plantations survived less than 7 years. Disease, exhaustion, and brutal treatment killed them faster than plantation owners could import replacements, so they just imported more people. By 1850, Brazil's coffee industry enslaved over 1.5 million people. These weren't just statistics. These were human beings with names, families, and stories. People like Anastasia, an enslaved woman who became a folk saint in Brazil. She was forced to wear an iron face mask for years because she spoke out against her enslavers. Her crime? Refusing to be raped by the plantation owner. The iron mask prevented her from eating solid food. She survived on liquids pushed through small holes. Other enslaved people shared their rations with her. She eventually died from infections caused by the mask. Today, millions of Brazilians pray to her as a saint of liberation. Her story reveals the human cost behind every cup of coffee consumed in the 19th century. But the brutality wasn't limited to Brazil. In Haiti, coffee production became so intensive that it triggered the world's first successful slave rebellion. By 1780, Haiti produced half of the world's coffee. The island had over 3,000 coffee plantations worked by 450,000 enslaved people. The conditions were worse than anywhere else. French plantation owners worked enslaved people to death, then simply imported more. The average life expectancy of an enslaved person in Haiti, 23 years. Children as young as 5 worked in coffee fields. In 1791, they'd had enough. On an August night, enslaved workers gathered for a secret voodoo ceremony in Bois Caïman. A priestess named Cécile Fatiman led the ritual. The message was clear: freedom or death. What happened next shocked the world. Within 2 weeks, the northern province of Haiti was in flames. Enslaved people burned over 1,000 plantations to the ground. They killed plantation owners and overseers. The French military tried to suppress the rebellion and failed. For 13 years, Haiti fought for independence. The rebels were led by formerly enslaved people: Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Henri Christophe. They defeated French, British, and Spanish armies. In 1804, Haiti became the first black republic in history. Coffee production collapsed. Haiti went from producing half the world's coffee to almost nothing. Those destroyed plantations were never rebuilt. The formerly enslaved people refused to work in coffee cultivation. It represented everything they'd fought against. This created a massive global coffee shortage. Coffee prices skyrocketed in Europe and America. Traders scrambled to find new sources. Brazil stepped in to fill the gap, dramatically expanding its plantations. This required importing hundreds of thousands more enslaved Africans. The Haitian Revolution ended slavery on one island, but intensified it everywhere else. Meanwhile, coffee was transforming European and American culture. Coffee houses became the engines of the Enlightenment. Scientists, philosophers, and revolutionaries gathered to debate ideas over coffee. The French Revolution was partially planned in Paris coffee houses. The Boston Tea Party? That was organized at the Green Dragon Coffee House. Coffee fueled the Industrial Revolution. Factory workers needed stimulation to survive 12-hour shifts. Coffee was cheaper than alcohol and increased productivity. British factory owners encouraged coffee breaks. It kept workers awake and compliant. By 1850, coffee was the world's second most valuable traded commodity after cotton. Both industries relied entirely on enslaved labor. But something was shifting. Abolition movements were gaining power in Europe and America. Britain banned the slave trade in 1807. Coffee plantation owners panicked. Without enslaved labor, how could they maintain production? The answer was simple: find other forms of exploitation. When slavery finally ended, the coffee industry didn't become ethical. It became creative in finding new ways to exploit vulnerable people. In Brazil, slavery officially ended in 1888, the last country in the Western Hemisphere to abolish it. Coffee plantation owners immediately replaced enslaved Africans with indentured laborers from Italy, Japan, and Syria. These workers weren't technically enslaved, but the conditions were nearly identical. Plantation owners advanced money for the ocean voyage to Brazil. Workers arrived owing massive debts. They were paid in scrip, plantation money only valid at the company store. Prices were inflated so high that workers could never pay off their debts. This system was called debt peonage. Children worked alongside their parents because family debt was inherited. If a worker tried to leave, private security forces hunted them down and returned them to the plantation. The Brazilian government looked the other way. Coffee was too valuable to the economy. Between 1880 and 1930, over 1.5 million Italian immigrants came to Brazil for coffee work. Most were trapped in this system for generations. Meanwhile, European colonizers were spreading coffee to new regions. The British brought coffee to Kenya and Tanzania in the 1890s. The French expanded cultivation in Vietnam and Laos. The Germans planted coffee in Cameroon and Rwanda. Each colonial power promised local farmers prosperity through coffee cultivation. The reality was very different. Colonial governments instituted hut taxes, forcing African farmers to pay cash taxes on their homes. The only way to earn cash: grow coffee for export. Farmers who refused had their homes destroyed and families imprisoned. In Kenya, the British went further. They passed laws forbidding African farmers from growing high-quality Arabica coffee. Only white settlers could cultivate Arabica. Africans were restricted to growing lower-quality Robusta beans, which sold for 1/3 the price. This wasn't about agriculture. It was about racial control. The system continued for 60 years until Kenya gained independence in 1963. By then, entire generations of African farmers had been locked into poverty while producing one of the world's most valuable commodities. But perhaps no region suffered more than Central America. Between 1870 and 1930, American corporations transformed Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua into banana republics. But they didn't just control bananas. They controlled coffee too. The United Fruit Company became the most powerful entity in Central America. They owned the railroads, the ports, and the telegraph systems. They controlled 42% of Guatemala's land. They paid no taxes to local governments. When Guatemala elected a president in 1951 who promised land reform, the company lobbied the U.S. government to overthrow him. In 1954, the CIA did exactly that. They orchestrated a coup, installed a military dictator, and protected United Fruit's interests. This triggered a civil war that lasted 36 years and killed over 200,000 Guatemalans, all to protect American control of coffee and banana production. Coffee had become a weapon of political control. The Cold War made things worse. The United States supported brutal dictatorships throughout Latin America to prevent communist land reforms. These dictators protected coffee plantation owners and crushed labor unions. In El Salvador, peaceful coffee workers striking for better wages were massacred by government death squads. The 1982 El Mozote massacre killed over 800 people, including 500 children, in a coffee-growing region. Why? Because locals had supported land reform. Throughout the 1980s, coffee-producing regions became war zones. Entire villages were destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of people fled to refugee camps, all while coffee continued flowing to American and European markets. Consumers had no idea. The coffee industry carefully sanitized its image. Marketing campaigns featured happy farmers in picturesque mountain villages. Coffee companies sponsored cultural events and positioned themselves as sophisticated and worldly. The violence was erased from the story. By the 1990s, something had to change. International human rights organizations began exposing the truth. Journalists documented the exploitation. Consumers started asking uncomfortable questions. The industry's response? Create fair trade certification. The first fair trade coffee appeared in 1988. The promise was simple: pay farmers a guaranteed minimum price and ensure decent working conditions. It sounded revolutionary. But here's the uncomfortable truth about fair trade. Studies show fair trade farmers earn only about 10% more than conventional farmers. The majority of the fair trade premium goes to certification costs, middlemen, and retailers, not farmers. A $10 bag of fair trade coffee might send 15 cents extra to the farmer. It's better than nothing, but it's hardly transformative. Meanwhile, the real money in coffee shifted somewhere else entirely. Today, the global coffee industry is worth over $200 billion annually. Farmers receive less than 10% of that total. Think about your last coffee purchase. A specialty latte costs around $6. The farmer who grew those beans? They received about 3 cents. The rest went to processors, exporters, shippers, roasters, retailers, and baristas. This imbalance isn't accidental. It's by design. 4 companies control over 50% of the global coffee trade: Nestlé, JDE Peet's, Starbucks, and Lavazza. These corporations dictate prices to farmers while maintaining massive profit margins. In 2024, Starbucks reported $36 billion in revenue. Coffee farmers in Ethiopia, where coffee originated, live on less than $2 per day. The exploitation has simply been modernized. Child labor remains rampant in coffee production. A 2020 investigation found over 1.5 million children working in coffee fields across Africa and Latin America, some as young as 8 years old. They work because their families cannot survive on the poverty wages paid by coffee buyers. Climate change is making everything worse. Rising temperatures are devastating coffee-growing regions. By 2050, experts predict that 50% of current coffee-growing land will become unsuitable for cultivation. Farmers are already experiencing this. Yields are dropping. Plant diseases are spreading. And who pays the price? Not the corporations, the farmers. But there's a darker modern development you need to know about. Vietnam became the world's second-largest coffee producer through a system eerily similar to historical forced labor. The Vietnamese government encouraged hundreds of thousands of ethnic minorities to relocate to the Central Highlands for coffee cultivation in the 1990s. They were promised land and prosperity. Instead, they received tiny plots, predatory loans, and environmental devastation. The rapid expansion of coffee plantations destroyed millions of acres of rainforest. Indigenous communities lost their traditional lands. Water sources dried up from intensive coffee irrigation. Today, Vietnam produces 30% of the world's coffee, and ethnic minority farmers remain impoverished. Meanwhile, Western coffee culture has become a luxury lifestyle brand. Specialty coffee shops charge premium prices for ethically sourced beans. Coffee influencers post aesthetic photos of latte art. Coffee subscription services promise direct trade relationships with farmers. The marketing is sophisticated and appealing, but the fundamental exploitation hasn't changed. A 2023 study found that 60% of coffee farmers worldwide live below the poverty line. They cannot afford to send their children to school. They cannot afford health care. Many cannot even afford to drink the coffee they grow. The third wave coffee movement promised to change this through direct relationships and higher prices. Some roasters do pay farmers significantly more, but they represent less than 5% of the global market. For the vast majority of farmers, nothing has improved. So what's the dark secret behind your morning coffee? It's this: nearly every coffee-producing region on Earth was built through enslavement, colonization, or exploitation. That historical brutality never truly ended. It just evolved into modern forms. Here are the revelations that should change how you see coffee. First, every major coffee variety outside Ethiopia exists because of colonial botanical theft. Your Arabica coffee descends from plants stolen through espionage and smuggling. Second, Between 1700 and 1888, over 12 million enslaved Africans worked on coffee plantations. That's more than died during the entire Middle Passage. Coffee drove the Atlantic slave trade as much as cotton or sugar. Third, the abolition of slavery didn't end exploitation in coffee. It was replaced with debt peonage, colonial taxation systems, and corporate control that persists today. Fourth, the Haitian Revolution, the first successful slave uprising in history, was primarily a rebellion by coffee workers. It destroyed half the world's coffee production and terrified plantation owners globally. Fifth, during the Cold War, the U.S. government overthrew democratically elected leaders and supported genocidal dictators specifically to protect coffee industry profits. Hundreds of thousands died. Sixth, fair trade certification, while better than nothing, has largely failed to transform farmers' lives. It's become more of a marketing tool than a genuine solution. Seventh, climate change threatens to devastate coffee production within 25 years. The farmers least responsible for climate change will suffer the most. And here's the final revelation. The coffee industry has never been sustainable or ethical at scale. It has always extracted maximum value from vulnerable farmers while concentrating profits among wealthy corporations and consumers. Does this mean you should stop drinking coffee? That's your decision. But you should understand what you're participating in. Every cup of coffee connects you to a 400-year history of exploitation. That history didn't end. It's happening right now. Some things you can do. Research roasters, who pay farmers significantly above market rates. Buy directly from farmer cooperatives when possible. Reduce consumption. Question marketing claims. Support organizations fighting for farmers' rights. But individual consumer choices won't solve systemic problems. Real change requires confronting the power structures that make exploitation profitable. It requires wealthy nations acknowledging their historical debts to coffee-producing regions. It requires corporations accepting lower profit margins. None of that will happen easily. The coffee industry has spent centuries perfecting the art of hiding its violence behind pleasant aesthetics.